Welcome to Iron Butterfly Podcast. My name is Megan Jaffer.
And I'm Katie Hopkins, and we'll be your hosts.
We created Iron Butterfly Podcast in honor of Eloise Page, the original Iron Butterfly. Our podcast continues her legacy, inviting the unsung heroines of the United States intelligence community to share their stories with aspiring leaders like you.
Thank you guys for having me. My name is Chitra Savanathan, for those who don't know me, and my company is Living Dino. We are a women-owned small business in Northern Virginia, really focused on the utility and growth of mostly non-traditional companies that have an interest in serving the national security space. A lot of what we do is help think about how to solution and address government requirements while staying true to what a company is trying to do for commercial dual use capabilities. And most of my philosophy is you get a lot more by bringing teams of like minded individuals to play. So I've kind of taken a more portfolio based approach and look at how do we connect the strong technology providers with other traditional system integrators and contractors to develop and address some of the complex problems by really, mashing together capabilities across the spectrum. So it's really about technology and growth, really targeting those complex security problems. On today's episode of Iron Butterfly Podcast, I'm excited to welcome Rupal Patel. Currently the founder and CEO of the Global Leadership Lab, she's redefining leadership for a complex, ever-changing world. Her path to C-suite hasn't been straight or easy, and that's exactly what makes her story so compelling. From her very first job running PR for an indie hip-hop label to working as a CIA analyst, she's navigated wildly different worlds with the same blend of curiosity, courage, and creativity. She's the kind of leader who's just as comfortable discussing geopolitics as she is grabbing coffee and nerding out over a great book. Describing herself as relatable, thoughtful, nerdy, and creative, she brings a rare combination of intensity and heart to everything she touches. Her favorite pastimes? Crushing obstacle courses, learning new languages, and having real conversations with smart people over a good cup of coffee. And here's a fun fact to get us started. She's left-handed, but her coordination knows no bounds. Ambi-footed in soccer, ambidextrous in weapons, and a lefty in golf. So good luck figuring out her dominant side. This is going to be a conversation packed with insights, real talk, and maybe a few surprises. Rupal, welcome to Iron Butterfly.
Well, Rupal, we are so excited to have you here. We have been waiting for this recording for forever. I don't even know how we met, but I feel like we've spoken a few times since, and I feel like we are like long lost spirit sisters. So we are so excited to have you, and thank you again for coming on. Welcome to Iron Butterfly.
Yay, me too. I'm super excited to be here.
Amazing. Well, as you probably can see if you're tuning in visually, watching, Megan is not with us today. Amanda is here, so round of applause for Amanda. She's not even behind the desk to do the sound effects, so we'll just do some little mini butterfly claps here. And in Megan's honor, we will ask her favorite question to start, which is, what were you listening to on the way here?
Oh, it wasn't music. It was my cabbie and I were having a conversation.
Oh, nice. Was it interesting?
It was. He was telling me about how he's always wanted to serve in uniform and how he wasn't sure which way to go. And then it was just a longish conversation about careers and life and family and all the things. So yeah, I was listening to a very insightful cab driver.
That's awesome. I feel like they could make a reality TV show out of like either Uber drivers or like someone who takes cabs a lot or taxi drivers or something. Because I do feel like you meet the most interesting people.
Yes.
When you're in cabs.
Yeah. You meet quite a selection of people, that's for sure.
Yeah, that's right. That's right.
Broad cross-section.
That's right.
But yeah, that was my soundtrack.
Amazing.
Yeah.
I love that. That's the best kind of soundtrack.
Yeah.
So typically we always joke that we like to start at the beginning, right?
Yeah.
So we start with kind of the hardest question in the world, which is like, tell us your story. Like, where do you come from? Like, how did you get interested in the intelligence community, into national security? And I know you're not serving in that world now. So we'd love to just learn a little bit more about you and how you got to this moment in the universe where you're sitting in this chair.
Yeah. Ooh, that's a big one. So I'm from New York, born and raised. My parents are from India and they moved here in the 70s. So me and my three siblings are all New Yorkers by birth. And we had a very big extended family who lived with us for long stretches of time. So I've always grown up around a lot of people. And it has its perks and it has some drawbacks. But I think if I can like make sense of the past from my position in the future, I think what it did is many things, but the things that I've noticed is one, it's given me a really broad appreciation for the word community and family and what that means and what that who that encompasses. It's shown me just through their lived example, and to this very day, still the way my parents live their lives is about helping others while you are helping yourself. So anytime you're in a position to give a hand, to lift someone up, you take it. Service is a big part of their lives. It was never sort of official through, any formal service, but it was always, community and giving back. It's also made me a really private person. I didn't have my own space until I was at college. And that, I'm very protective of my alone time, of my like space. And that is something I think perhaps came from there. But it made me a really keen observer of dynamics because there was always so much happening.
Oh, that's really interesting.
And I was a very... what's the word? I'm not going to say introverted because that's not the right word. I was a very internal child and a very self-conscious child. And I think that environment, I don't know which way the directional arrow goes, but in that environment, it made me I was always just observing. I didn't really want to be in the mix. And I just sort of watched things from the corner. And I think that either suited my temperament or I was just, there were too many people to compete with. So I was just going to make the smart decision and hang out on the sidelines. I'm very different now. I think that's sort of the origin story. And there was no, I was always that kid who didn't know what I wanted to be when I grew up. My parents are doctors and everyone always assumed that I would be a doctor. So I was like, well, that's the one thing I'm not going to be.
Love that.
Right?
Love
because
that.
it's so stupid.
Right.
I mean, it's so dumb. There's zero reason. I think I could have potentially really liked it. But actually, speaking of cab drivers, I've been taking a lot of cabs. One of the things that I was talking about with one of the cabbies today when I was with my family earlier, we were talking about his students and my kids. And I said one of them was an unknown quantity. And he's like, those are the best, right? Like the unknown quantities in the sense of like, you just, but the way he was like, what you should do, what I always tell my students is the best major is undecided. Yes.
Love that.
And I was like, that was me. I didn't decide on poli-sci until my junior year at Columbia.
Yeah.
And
go Lions.
Yay. Woo. Yeah. And so, so I did poli-sci kind of by default. I was like running out of options and running out of time.
Process of elimination.
Pretty much.
Yeah.
And I was like, okay, well, which courses can I use the most of what I've already taken to fulfill a requirement, right? Anyway, blah, blah, blah. Poli-sci at Columbia. Took a couple of years off and then spent 2 years teaching. And then when I was at Chicago getting my master's in IR, with the assumption that I would go on to work at the State Department or become a lawyer, I was recruited by the agency. So the intelligence world was not a part of my grand design because one, never had a grand design, and two, to the extent that I had any plans for my career, it was not intelligence.
Yeah.
Yeah.
That actually sounds kind of similar to your background. Like, I feel like you were undecided for a while and were like kind of figuring out what you wanted to do.
I was initially I went to community college for many, many years. And it's a very long story. We won't get into it. But I thought I was going to do some type of criminal justice because I'm from California.
Yeah.
The intelligence agency, those are the things that you hear about in the movies, right?
Yeah.
It's Jack Ryan, it's James Bond. And so I always thought that service, if I didn't want to be a police officer, I would have to do it at like the federal law enforcement level. And so I was taking criminal justice courses thinking like that was the route I was going to go on. And just through like a fluke, my counselor basically told me because I tried to transfer and I couldn't get in based off my grades.
Yeah.
And she was like, well, you could get an AA, which would help you in the transfer process. But if you wanted to do criminal justice, you would have to change schools. And I'm like, I don't want to do that. I had already changed schools once before.
Yeah.
So I ended up switching to sociology because there was so much overlap.
Mm.
And that set me on a totally different trajectory
Yeah.
that introduced me eventually to the IC world.
Yeah.
And
Social sciences for the win, honestly.
Yeah.
Agree, right?
Yeah, it's true.
Totally. It's like the perfect blend of everything.
yeah.
I also love that you said that the best major is undecided because there's something so great about like going into the world that
Right.
open-minded. Like
Mhm.
you were actually willing to learn anything and
Yeah.
like sort of let your curiosity guide you,
Yeah.
which I think is a really amazing way of thinking about like what education should be, right? Sometimes we think about it as like this really rigid, structured thing, but it doesn't have to be that way.
No, and I think it for me it was a blessing and a curse because it was like, ooh, I have so many things that I could be interested in, right? Let me
Mhm.
explore and try all of these things. But then the curse of it was like, oh my gosh, but I'm exploring and trying so many things.
Yeah,
you
the
know, and
overwhelming.
it can be
Yeah.
really overwhelming.
Yeah.
And I remember actually back in high school when I was graduating, my guidance counselor said to me, and it was so wise at the time, even though she was a mediocre guidance counselor. She was like,
That's a theme on this
It
show, by the
is.
way.
It is.
It
Yeah.
is. You would be shocked by the number of things we've heard recounted that guidance counselors say.
so this was not horrible, but it wasn't helpful. And all she said was, your challenge is going to be because she said something along the lines of like, because you could be good at anything, your challenge is going to be figuring out what that is.
Mm.
And so I felt similarly as an undergrad, whereas like the world is my oyster, which is great, but it's also like, oh my God, but
Where
I
do
have
I
4
start?
years
Yeah.
to narrow down this oyster.
Mhm.
I mean, you figure it out because you have to.
Yeah,
but yeah,
totally.
it is. To your point about the curiosity, I think that for me is a big recurring theme in my life. You know,
Mm.
is to have a general sense of direction or purpose, but then to be open about the means and the
Mhm.
how and the how long.
Yeah, what it actually looks
Yeah.
like. I love that. So you mentioned that you got recruited
Mhm.
by CIA.
Yeah.
So tell us that story. Like, what did that look like? I always love these CIA recruitment stories because they're always a little like spooky, but also goofy at the same time.
It
So
was-
I'd love to hear about it.
It was a little bit goofy. So my recollection of it is pretty hazy on the details, but I remember, and he ended up being my one of my, I think he was my office director when I joined. But I was on campus and it was, I think, October of that year, and this gentleman, who later became my boss, approached me and was just like, would you be interested in applying for a job at the CIA? And I was like, yes, I don't know. Like, what does this mean? And I think he must have just read me really well in that moment, because like, his response was like, well, we can have a longer conversation about what it would be and how, what we're looking for. But if you are interested, let's make a time to meet and have that conversation. And so we did. We then, from that initial just like bizarre out of left field invite, went and had an hour-ish so time during which he talked me through what it would be to be an analyst, what excuse me, what the role entails, what the like what else the agency does beyond what I've seen in the movies, because that's all I thought it was.
Mhm.
And I remember at the time thinking like, this sounds awesome, but also the one thing that he was again so wise about was like, we're not supposed to be policy prescriptive.
Mm.
That is like the golden rule.
Mm.
And he asked me at that point, is that going to be a problem for you? And me in my like eager, like, yeah, I can do anything. I was like, no, of course not, right? I get it. We're just here to inform. We're not here to dictate and blah, 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 blah. And I think then fast forwarding when I joined, I didn't realize how frustrating that would be.
Mm.
Because sometimes you just want to be like, do this thing or don't do this thing, right? And you can't. And
Yeah.
even when it to us as analysts, it was so obvious, like, oh, maybe we should be a little bit more directive. You never could. You couldn't even have the faintest whiff of policy prescription in any of what we did. So anyway, long story short, I said yes, and I loved it, but there was a lot about it that I was like, oh man, I just wish
Mm.
For me, it wasn't enough to just be like, here's the best information. For me and my temperament as a person, I'm like, I want to fix this problem. Let's do this thing. But
Yeah.
That's super interesting.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Where did you feel that the most? Like, where did you
Hmm.
feel that tension the most? Like, was there like a particular issue that you worked on where you
Yeah.
felt that? Or like, I'm just curious what that felt like for you.
Yeah.
Like, it almost feels like a moral, like sort of, was it a moral obligation or was it more of just like this is like this, I could do this so much better, or like what where did it come
Yeah.
from?
So it was one of our big like war on terror accounts, right?
Uh-huh.
And for the longest time, it didn't actually affect me, right? For the longest time, I was like, okay, I'm happy saying like, blah blah blah. This is what's happening, and this is what it means for us.
Right.
But in particular with our war efforts in Iraq and Afghanistan, I should have known, but the naive optimist in me sort of still held on to the hope that like the outcome would be very different to what it was sort of 20 years later. And so I can't remember any specific points of pain or any specific things that I was like, oh, I just wish we could do this thing. But it was more just a sense of realization that actually, no matter what we did to some extent, what happened was going to happen. Largely because, and this is now going back to like poli-sci international affairs, right? Like nation building is kind of a losing game.
Yeah.
And I don't know what it would have been better to have attempted. But there was a point at which I remember thinking like, yikes, there's only so much that we can, excuse my language here, but so like that we can unfuck here.
Yeah, totally.
Yeah.
That's so hard. I know that you have thoughts on this. I've seen Amanda get animated about this topic multiple times.
Yeah. Katie and I are going to solve the world problems over a beer, right?
Yeah, exactly.
Exactly.
Yeah. No,
Yeah.
I'm like, as you're talking about like being policy prescriptive, I'm just thinking like, could you explain maybe a little bit more of what
Sure.
that means?
Yeah.
And then, because I think what people forget is that the CIA just doesn't go out and do things necessarily. They're
Such a great point.
The point is that they're there to inform,
Correct.
and they're informing policymakers who are really the ones that are making the decisions.
Exactly.
And so when you say you can't be policy prescriptive, that means you can't sway your analysis in any one particular way to make them make a decision
Exactly.
in your favor, right?
And
So I'm curious if you could speak to that a little bit more
100%.
and just like, as you're talking about how difficult that becomes,
Yeah.
is it because, you're seeing them make decisions that, despite the analysis you've provided them, leads them to make a decision that you don't agree with, and then that causes, the kick in the can down the road over the 20-year period that we saw in Afghanistan? Or like, how does that shape up?
So for the policy prescription thing, actually, it is probably one of the greatest assets of the CIA, right? It's like we don't go in and say, Mr. President or, Mr. 4-star general in country, do this thing or don't do this thing. We say, here's our best analysis. Here's what the intelligence suggests. This is the universe in which our information can give us some clear understanding of what's happening and likely scenarios and outcomes. These are all of the unknowns, right? These are the things that we just don't have a good enough handle on, but also this is what we're doing to improve our collection so we can fill some of those gaps, right? So for me, that I loved that part, that just like the pure intellectual honesty of like, this is what we know, this is what we don't know, this is what we're doing about it.
Well, and that's a fun exercise too, because it's not like that is served up to you like, oh, here are the facts and here, like you have to deduce those things.
Exactly.
And it's like, well, what would make me change my mind about this thing, or what would fill this information gap, or maybe what wouldn't, like what would fall short. And that's like a fun exercise too.
And it's a critical exercise, right? Because that is the thing, is like one of the things that being at the agency, and most people are surprised when I say this word, that it taught me was this humility in like the sheer face of the unknowns out there and all of the complexities of the world and all of the the smallest things that could have outsized impact, right? There's a real, for me, what that developed was a real awareness of how little, not that as an organization we know, but just as human beings, and that we can know,
understand the world.
Exactly. And so that the fact that we were trained to be very clear about this is what we know, this is what we don't know, or not even to say definitively this is this thing. It was like, this is most likely to happen, or this is the probable outcome. You know, there was a lot of hedging language because it was honest. And a lot of people found it really annoying to be on the receiving end of like, oh, this may or may not happen or whatever. But that was the reality of what it was. And I liked that we were not politicized. I liked that we were not sort of pushed into a corner to say, well, actually, this is this thing or that is that thing. It gave me a real respect for taking that position, even though I don't like it, because I'm okay, this is the situation, let's do this thing, right? That for me, that's how I operate. But actually, from an organizational perspective, it gave us our objectivity. It gave us our, as an organization, it gives us just the real authority that we carry, right? Because whether they like us or not, subsequent administrations will at least respect the fact that like,
you're not putting your hand on the scale.
Correct. Yeah. And I think that's important.
Yeah.
So to some extent, like, who cares my personal frustrations, right? Like, there's a bigger picture to be served here. And I think to the broader question of like, you know, what happens once you deliver the briefing or the president reads that PDB or whatever it is, you kind of have to let it go, right? Like, you have to let go of any feeling of not ownership, but any feeling of like,
control.
Yeah. Right? And like, fast forward, I never made this connection until right this second, but like, that's just an important life lesson.
It is,
right?
Sure.
I'm a parent. There is so much out of my control, like in raising these little humans, in business and the work that I do now, right? There's so many things that like, the humility was something that was obvious to me, and then that just sort of I left with, but it's that sense of acknowledging how much you don't control is in some ways kind of liberating.
Yeah, totally.
Yeah.
I think it's funny because there's often this like idea that, you know, like the CIA or the Oval Office or the, you know, Situation Room is like these like, you know, men smoking cigars, like plotting out the future of the world.
Yeah.
But like, that's actually not possible. Right. And it's like,
because
you can't control, you can't
exactly.
predict, like you can't know everything. And I completely agree. I think that's such a great point about just like the humility that brings, and like you have to be willing to accept the uncertainty in all of it.
And then amidst that, and I think again, this like to like, it goes back to a slightly bigger picture lesson is instead of feeling depressed by that fact or like frustrated about it, what it reinforces is to control the controllables. Right. And to be honest, the controllables are often far smaller than any of us would ever really like.
That's right.
But that is just the
but they
reality.
still matter.
Yeah, exactly. Because you can't force an outcome. You can't accurately say, if I do these 10 things in succession, then this is going to be the result. Like, you can do the best in any given moment with what you've got, but that is all you're ever going to be able to do is do the best with what you've got, and then just tweak and adjust accordingly, and control the controllables.
Yeah, totally. I love that. That's such a great lesson. So you were at CIA, it sounds like, during the War on Terror. How long were you there? Like, ultimately, you clearly made the decision to leave. Was it because of that frustration with kind of the like the limits of what you were able to do or the impact that you were able to have in that role, or kind of just talk us through like what that journey looked like for you?
Yeah, it was I was really sad to go. But I knew I needed to go, and I think the reason I left, again with the benefit of hindsight, I would not have said this at the time. I think I was burnt out. And for most of my career there, I kid you not, I would like wake up 5 a.m, excited to get ready and like go to work for most of my career. But it was exhausting. So many of the mechanics around, not just the issues that I was working on, but like just, you know, not being able to like talk to people about what you do, and the lifestyle impact on, and I did this to myself to some extent, on all of the overseas deployments that I went on and volunteered for. It started to take a toll, and I remember thinking I just needed to do something different, or not to do something different. I just needed a break. And the only thing, there was no like, but that was the challenge. It was like, this is all I'd known, right? And I loved it. And
how long had you been there at
sorry,
that point?
6 years.
Oh, 6 years.
I left when
Okay,
I
gotcha. That's a good chunk of time, yeah.
When I was 6 years old. Yeah. yeah, it was a good chunk of time. And
Particularly if you're going overseas too. I
Yeah.
mean, that's like dog years.
it was, yeah, in some ways it went so fast, in some ways it was less so. And I loved it. I mean, I genuinely did love it. And I worked with some amazing human beings, some of whom we were talking about before. But I was tired, and I just needed a break. And I knew, because I had seen so many others like leave and then come back and leave and come back. And some who'd done it multiple times, I was like, oh, okay, if that's an option, that's actually kind of a safe bet, right?
Yeah,
Like
that's
if I
nice.
decide to
Yeah.
leave and see what else is out there and I'm not happy, I'd be very, very happy to come back, just having had a bit of a break. So it was really that. There was no like big push, there was no big pull. There was really, I was like, what am I going to do, right? And so I had done, as I was thinking about like my exit, like what next, I had applied to a bunch of consulting companies. I was like checking out, different job opportunities, both in and around the DC area and some overseas. And then I was like, screw it. I'm going to just go to business school because I love school. I love school so much. But also it would be an easy way to transition what I thought I thought it would be an easy way to transition into the private sector. It was
dun dun dun.
Well, yeah, exactly, right. And we can go into some of that because I imagine it's relevant for a lot of people at the moment. But like, people really couldn't make sense of me. They really couldn't. Even after I'd gone to business school for 2 years and done the thing of like, but I speak your language now, right? Like I can talk the talk. It was, and maybe some of this was cultural because I did my MBA in London, and I was trying to initially find jobs out there. And I kept getting this very British response to all of my job interviews. It's like, you have a very interesting background. And I was like, if a British person tells you you're interesting, they don't usually mean it as a compliment. Or it's that
That's good to know.
I know. Saving that one for later.
Reevaluating all past like conversations now.
Yeah. It's kind of like a double-edged sword, right? It's like, I mean, I think it's not to be taken at face value. So
I mean, I can't even imagine that. Like, it's hard enough, I feel like, to even convince Americans, if you've worked at CIA, that like you can speak the language and you can do the job. But I can't even imagine then piling on top of that being in a foreign country, like even an ally, right? It's just culturally, I can't even imagine that.
It's funny, the subtlety, the differences.
Yeah.
But anyway, long story short, I tell very long stories. They're never short.
No.
But yeah, that's why I left. And there, I remember thinking at the time, like, did I make the right choice? Should I have stayed? All of the things, right? But actually, after I, excuse me, after I did leave, I was like, wow, there's a whole world out here. There's so much that I had no insight into. And then it came back to that Columbia problem, right? It was like, oh my God, there's so many things. What can I do, right? Like I can try so many. But
You're undecided once again.
Undecided. I feel like this is a recurring theme in my life. Like I'm regularly deciding what I want to be when I grow up. But it was kind of fun. It was kind of terrifying at the same time. But yeah, I mean, those 6 years are some of the most special of my life. And, in sort of thinking about our conversation, I think one of the questions you guys asked was what has been some of my favorite jobs. And I could only think of two. I mean, being an analyst at the agency and then working in hip hop.
Oh my God, I love that. Okay,
we're gonna have to talk about that.
Yeah. So how did you end up working in hip hop? Like, tell us the story.
This is so fun. I think, and also again, that thing of like in retrospect, all of the threads make sense. So it was my first real job. I was 16, and this is in like the pre-internet era where I was like reading hip hop magazines and sending actual letters to people. Like you'd read the magazine, like the editor's, name and address, and you'd be like, hey, this is who I want to intern, right? Anyway, so somebody responded to one of my letters, and it was a small independent hip hop label whose biggest artist at the time was this man called Noriega, Nore. And I was a PR assistant.
Amazing.
And my boss was amazing. I'm still in touch with her. She's one of my favorite people. But that's how it happened. It was like that hustle of like, kind of, again, speaking the language of the people who are listening, like it was kind of like a targeting exercise, right? I was like, ooh, I want to work in this industry. What are the ways in? Okay, well, I'll buy the magazines. It was like Vibe and but I can't even remember like all of the hip hop magazines that some might not even exist anymore. And then, yeah, just like doing the digging in the back, or like going and searching through directories of like, who's this person at Interscope? Who's this person at Sony? Who's this person at here? And then just sending out
I love
letters.
that analogy. I think that's super interesting.
Mhm.
Like, and I love what you said too about, because I think this is so applicable to people right
applicable.
now. Like,
100%.
we know so many people in our community, like even in our just like neighborhoods, communities, like just in DC, who are job hunting
Yeah, yeah.
right now, right? Like, what do you feel like? It sounds like you almost approached it as if you were a CIA analyst.
Yeah.
Like, what skills did you have that you maybe didn't even recognize would be valuable in that search? Like, what advice would you have for people who are going through that right now?
I think it's hustle. It
Mhm.
really is like that spirit of, and this is very much the spirit of the agency as well, of like that spirit of indomitability, of like, again, resourcefulness, figuring
Mhm.
it out, not screaming into the wind about how things are this or things are that, just figuring out what you're going to do with the resources you've got available.
Mhm.
And I think that like bias for action and
Mhm.
just taking a small step to break through whatever inertia. I didn't know any of this, right? Like I guess I had that in me as a high school, as a 16-year-old, and it's then sort of, it served me well over time. But it's that sense of like just being resourceful.
Yeah.
And I talk a lot now in the work that I do with large organizations about just, that MacGyver mentality, right? So for those of us who grew up with Dean Cain, the new MacGyver I think sucks, but that's a side conversation. But no, that idea of like, I'm in this now.
Mhm.
I have to make the best of this however I can. And like literally emptying your pockets of everything you have available to you, and just figuring out what you're going to do to like break through the situation, right? And so that, yeah, I guess like the formal name for it is targeting, but it is exactly that, like having that lateral approach. Like, if I want this information, where can I get it? Or if I have this thing I'm trying to do, who do I
Mhm.
know who might be able to help? Or like, what are my ins and my, and I talk about it in my corporate work about resourcing yourself. Everybody needs to learn how to do that in whatever context, whatever transition. Even large companies now are like struggling to figure out, what am I going to do next, or how do I deal with this problem? It's like, it's a very, it can make it a very structured process, right? Of like,
Mhm.
here are all the people I know, here are all the resources I have, here's all the financial, whatever resources I have access to. And what happens is you realize you have so much more. Again, that sense of like movement and just
Mhm.
taking small actions creates new ideas and sparks connections that you never even realized were
Mhm.
there. And it just opens up your world, because when anyone, and this again, this is true now, but this is always true, like whenever you specifically have a problem or challenge or whatever in any context, we get so tunnel visioned, right? And all we do is like, and this, I'm going to quote another agency officer. She said once about how, I don't want to get stuck admiring the problem.
Mhm.
But that's what we do, right? When we're faced with like really intense, like stressful situations, we're like admire the problem and we don't let ourselves to take a step back out. And so to short circuit that instinct, which I think is a
Mhm.
natural human
Yeah,
instinct,
of
right? Of like, oh
course.
my God, this is so hard. And look at it from this angle, look at it from that angle. Like, and those of us who are analytical are even worse at like the spinning
Yeah.
and the
Yes.
overanalyzing, right? And so to like break through that cycle, it's just like, okay, no, I'm going to write down all of the things, right? And at various stages of my career, that has helped immeasurably. And I still have to do it now, because even now, even though I know it makes sense to do it, anytime I have a problem or I'm like figuring something out, I do the same thing that I always do,
Mhm.
right? And you just sort of try to like power through it, and you'll
Yeah.
like muscle your way and reinvent the solution every time, and it's so
Mhm.
dumb. So
I
Right.
love that.
yeah,
I love that. I really love the idea that like you only have to take one step,
correct.
just one step at a time.
Yeah.
Like you don't have to like cross the whole
No,
bridge
you
at the
really
same
can't.
time, you know?
Yeah.
I just think that's such a good reminder, because particularly when faced with like
Yeah.
a very big and like complex and ambiguous problem, like finding a new career,
Yeah. Yeah.
it's like, where do I even
Yeah.
start? But it's like, if at the end of the day you're a little bit closer than you were at the beginning of the day, like
Yeah.
then that was a great day.
Or you've like weeded out one thing that you realize you don't
Yeah,
want to
that's
do,
right.
right?
That's
It
right.
is like, I think so much is just about like taking any small sensible action.
Yeah.
Right? Like something relevant.
That's
right?
a nice
Not like
asterisk,
going
yeah.
and changing like your hair color or whatever,
Yeah.
but which might also help. But yeah, no, I think
Yeah.
it's so true. And we could, it's, for me, action is always, and movement is always
Mm.
the best antidote to feelings of paralysis and like stuckness. And that can be mental action, it can be physical action, but yeah, I think
Love
small
that.
steps. Yeah.
I love that. What questions do you have?
I'm
Soaking it all in.
Yeah, I'm soaking it all in. Like I sometimes
I feel
struggle
like
because
this
I'm like, there's
applies to
so
many
many.
It sure
different.
does.
Yes,
Yeah.
It really
it does.
does.
Absolutely,
Yeah,
absolutely.
I know.
So okay, so tell us. So it sounds like you graduated from business school. You were like looking for a job. You weren't sure where you're gonna land, and you're also just like as an aside, but I think it's very pertinent to this is super entrepreneurial, right? So like. Did you join a company right away? Did you join an organization? Or were you like, I'm going to go it alone and bet on myself? Or like, did that kind of develop over time? Like, how did you, what did that look like after you left the agency?
I spent 2 years, the 2 years at business school, doing all the things. Again, like
I'm not surprised.
right in the
the
world of
slightest.
possibilities.
Yeah.
Like, how do I? So I wrote a novel.
Oh my God,
yeah,
amazing. Wait,
mhm.
okay, pause. What was the novel?
I won't give you the title or the premise yet, but I'll tell you because it's so good and I want to do a big reveal at some point.
Okay.
But it is a fictionalized account of my time at the agency and me and the 3 women who I EOD'd with. So I entered on duty with, and we went through the same like analytical training program together, et cetera, but then ended up becoming really, really good friends and having very different careers. And it was sort of like a homage to them, a homage to my time at the agency, but also telling our story and the experiences of what it's really like to be a woman at the agency and that time and place. Anyway, so this was a novel. I really struggled to fictionalize it because I was like, but I know these people so well, right? Like, what do I change? What do I keep? Whatever. What do I embellish? Anyway, but I did that during business school. I worked at a ton of different startups and just got a feel for like the energy, the people, the kinds of problems people were solving and the ideas that were out there. I applied for a bunch of consulting companies. I did it all. And because I'm an ideas person, I thought, well, maybe I should just back myself, right? I've got this runway of savings. I've got a ton of ideas. I have like all of the things in place that if I'm ever going to do it now. And so I decided through a process of elimination to start a real estate investment company.
Nice.
And initially the goal was just to keep it small, like just, bring in a steady lifestyle income where at some point it would be pretty passive, but nothing, overly like crazy. And then 6 years into that, we were able to retire my husband from his day job. So he joined it full time and now is growing it in like a very much more ambitious direction than the original intent. But like I did, and there's so many things I want to say about this. But one of the things that I knew even from the very beginning around like backing myself was 2 things. One, and this is pertinent life advice for everybody, is there are always going to be naysayers. And you just have to be really careful about the people you let in to your headspace when you are doing something really vulnerable. Because I remember, excuse me, I had never started a business before. I had never started a business in a foreign country before. I had never worked in real estate. I had rented apartments and that was the extent of my experience. And yet I was like, but I'm going to do this thing. Like I can figure it out. I'm a smart person. I can, a lot of people do it. Right. And you don't just like go stupidly into these things, but I had faith in myself and my abilities to make things happen. Or to try my best to make things happen.
Yeah, of course.
And so, but so many people in my life who really loved me and were like, they cared about my best interests were actively trying to discourage me, right? They're like, oh, but you've got this MBA now. You should really like just get like an impressive name on your resume and then you can do this thing as a side hustle, but don't waste this opportunity, blah, blah, blah. And it was on top of like the internal dialogue I had around like, oh, what am I doing? Is this a mistake? Then other people are reflecting that back to you and it just makes it that much harder.
Yeah.
Right.
And so what I ended up doing was 2 things. One is just learning how to tune it out. So some were family members who I love, right? And they were doing it because they love me. But I just found a way to be like, you know what? When we're on the phone, I'm just going to either do this until you're done, right? Because it happened all the time. Or just cut the conversation short in an elegant way because this was a loop that we weren't going to break out of. But also on top of that, then had to curate a new community for myself, right? People who were in that space, who had done the thing, who could like show me the way, give me advice, show me what's possible. And that for me is probably the biggest life lesson. Like people often ask me if there's like one thing you would like to share. It's be careful of and be very careful of and curate very carefully the inputs that you have in your life.
Yeah.
The people, the ideas, the books, the podcasts, like all of the inputs, because they all make a difference. And, you know, they leave marks that are bigger or smaller. But if
They
you're,
plant seeds.
they
and
plant seeds,
those can
right?
be, yeah.
And so you
seeds,
just
bad
have to be
seeds.
very intentional. And most of us are
Yeah.
not.
Yeah.
And I remember during that process of like churn and like figuring out my life and myself, like in the absence of an organization to be affiliated with, and you know, all of the trappings of success. I'm an A-star, like an A+ student, right? Like I'm that Lisa Simpson person who like had constantly spent my life blooming under the like praising eyes of like authority figures and teachers and adults. And so you get used to that of like just needing that external recognition, right? And validation. And then I had nothing.
Yeah.
And it was really hard
That
because
is.
I'm like, oh my God, who the hell am I? Right? Like I'm a nobody. And that rebuilding of my sense of self detached from what I was doing or what I was affiliated with was really, really hard. And it's going to be hard at any stage, but you make it harder for yourself if you've got the wrong people around you. And I remember one time hearing this quote where someone had said about like, you're the average of the 5 people you spend the most time with. And
Wow, that's really powerful.
And I did the inventory on the spot and I was like, holy shit, this is not good.
Wow.
Right?
My gosh.
Because we just default to the same old,
Yeah.
right? And so for me, the biggest piece of advice is like at any stage of your life, whatever you're doing, whatever you're trying to achieve, whether it's in your relationships, in your career, in your creative pursuits, in your health, whatever, be careful, like do that inventory. Like who are those people, right? Because peer pressure exists at every stage.
Right.
And research bears this out, right? We are the average in wealth, in outlook, in tastes, in health, in weight, in interests and hobbies of those people. And so just make sure that you're not just drifting along with that same crowd that might not be appropriate for doesn't mean you like cut them off, right?
Yeah, of course.
It just means that you maybe focus less time and attention in certain groups of people, and you find new people to help take you to that next level.
That's such good advice.
I know. It really is.
I'm just as you're talking about that, I'm thinking about my own experience. And one of the biggest lessons that I learned when I moved to this area is that people, when you go to them for advice or for networking, they're always going to give it to you from their own perspective.
Yeah.
100%.
And it could be like, you know, you're interested in joining X agency and you go to person and you want to get their advice, and everything that they give you is from their own experience. And so it colors the way that you choose to move forward on your own path, right? And if they've had a negative experience or if they have certain strong opinions, that then translates into how they guide you. And I think, you know, as someone who in the last couple of years found their community, it's so important to have people around you who can uplift you, who can guide you. I think like about Iron Butterfly, Megan and Katie, you know, them being those people for me in many ways. It's seriously the best advice that I think you could give someone, especially in a time of like transition.
Yeah. And I think, look, everybody will have an opinion, right? So
Totally.
it's for me, the 2 criteria for people who I will ever ask advice for and then actually take it from is people who are qualified to give it, right? Who've done the thing, who've had the success, who've had the experience, aren't just like, you know, totally just, you know, people who have opinions, but have been in the arena themselves. But then secondly, and this is what a lot of people forget to do, is they also share the same values. Because there are so many ways to succeed at anything, to achieve anything, right? So you just want to make sure, like you were saying, that the people you're getting that insight and that advice from are going to be people who are going to make you feel okay about how you did it and be able to show you how it can be done in the way that feels right for you. And I'm not prescribing any one way or another, but it's just like make sure your values are aligned as well as the expertise, because that will make all the difference.
Yeah, absolutely. I love that. It's like their advice says way more about their own bias than it does about your capability. And it's like, you know, some people aren't aren't meant to build companies.
Yeah.
Like they're
Yeah.
not, right? Some people aren't meant to take those leaps.
Mhm.
Like everybody's life situation is
Yeah, yeah,
different. And I love that frame for looking at it because you're basically saying their advice isn't wrong. It's
Yeah.
just wrong for me.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And like I think that's a
Exactly.
really lovely way of looking at it.
Yeah. Yeah.
Amazing. So tell us about all of your ventures. So
Oh
you have
gosh,
this
yeah.
real estate investment
Yeah.
company. Sounds like it's been amazingly successful. It's still
Hmm.
alive today,
Yeah.
thriving today. Like
Yeah.
what other things have you dabbled in that you're
Hmm.
really proud of?
Gosh. Okay. So that venture is still yeah, it's still there and it's growing and it's good. I will say for everything that I have done, right? Like you pay your pound of flesh. And I know this is obvious, but I think it bears repeating because it's when I have like parts of my experience reflected back to me, I'm like, yeah, I did all of those things, but also the behind the scenes picture is ugly,
Mhm.
you know, and
It's
like,
such a great
and
reminder.
it's
Yeah.
days of like literally ugly crying under the covers and feeling lost, feeling scared, feeling nervous, feeling like, holy shit, what did I do? Or like, how am I going to get out of this? Um, so all of this to say is like, just know the price you're willing to pay for the thing that you want to do. And the reason I say that is because so like while I was growing my real estate business, there were so many things that I had to just not do. I basically was a loner, not a loner. I basically didn't do a lot of social things for a long time,
Mhm.
you know?
Yeah.
And like I had all of these temptations from friends who were, you know, swanning around the world, going on like weekend trips here and girly spa days there. And didn't mean I was like a miser and did nothing fun. It just meant that like I I said no to a lot of things.
Mhm. That was the
Yeah.
trade-off.
That
Yeah.
was really hard to do. Um, so all of this to say yes. So
Mhm.
that was like again a hard thing. I'm a maximalist, right? Like I want to do all the things, have
Mhm.
all at the same time. Like I want it all, right? And learning about trade-offs or like learning to accept trade-offs is
Mhm.
to some extent still, but less so, is still really hard. Is
Mhm.
hard. So yeah, so the real estate business, it's growing. It went sort of sometimes there were two steps forward, one step back,
Mhm.
but it's you know I'm glad that some of those things happened because it forced the difficult decisions that
Mhm.
I don't think I would have taken otherwise. And so now the growth trajectory is really, really stable and it's
Mhm.
really steady as opposed to anything like, you know, that stupid Silicon Valley, like hockey stick, like projections of this, that, right? Like all of that, like broy
Yeah.
nonsense. And it's just for me, that's again, that values thing, right? That wasn't right for me.
Mhm.
Um, anyway, so that business
Mhm.
is now nicely pretty much ticking along,
Mhm.
runs, you know, smoothly, and is growing steadily. And it was never something though, even when I started it, it was never something that I knew I was like, this is it for me, right? Like hanging it all up and like I'm done for the rest of my life. For me, and this again I think is an important reminder for all of us, is like it was just it's a next step.
Mhm.
Didn't have to be the final step.
Mhm.
And many things in our lives and our careers can just be an interim before something else happens. We might not know what that next thing is going to be
Right.
or when it's going to happen, but for me I went in knowing that this was not like the calling of my soul and like my
Mhm.
life's purpose, right? This was it served many purposes and it provided meaning in certain ways, but I was like, okay, what else, right? What else is there going to be? When I'm in a position to look around, what will I want to do? And so I planted, you said the word planted seeds. I planted a lot of seeds because
Mhm.
I have a lot of different things that I needed to do to like nurture my soul at the time.
Mhm.
And it was relationships, right? It was
Mhm.
sharing what I was learning along the way with people. I think I have a bit of a teacher's spirit. And so for me, it's not just about knowing how to do something. It's like, how can I help others with that knowledge? What practical support can I give those who are going through a similar thing? And I did so much of that informally while I was growing the real estate business. And I loved it. Like I absolutely loved it. And then I started slowly formalizing it into like formal consulting, like mini consulting programs, mini coaching
Oh, that's
programs.
cool.
And I realized like I want to do this. And so for me,
That's the
that's
best feeling.
it really was. And again, it was that, again, creating a community, it was giving back, it was like using my expertise to help others, all of these things that I love. And that 8 years ago, I formalized into the work I do now with the Global Leadership Lab, which is basically taking my life's experience, right? All of the things that I learned formally, informally, through training, through just having to be resourceful and figuring it out for myself, but through actually doing it and helping others who are in a similar position or trying to solve similar challenges and just need fresh, tangible ways of getting things done. And that is really gratifying.
Yeah.
And so that is what I do now. It's the mix of like, I'm very rarely now needed a lot in the real estate stuff. So my main focus is on the Global Leadership Lab. It's on writing my next book, and it's on having interesting conversations with smart people and things like this.
I love that.
Yeah.
So one thing that we talk a lot about is the butterfly effect, which
Yes.
is this idea that you kind of, again, you said the phrase planting seeds. It's
Yeah.
like this idea that you can like plant these seeds and
Yeah.
over time they can have this outsized impact on the
Yeah,
world, right?
For sure.
So in your latest venture, like
Yeah.
how do you think about the way that you have impact in the world?
Ooh.
Like how do you
Yeah.
think about that?
Oh, that's always my intent, right? For me, like I want to have a positive impact on the
Yeah,
world.
of course.
So that is the North Star for me in everything I do. So I go in, so tangibly, what I know my impact has been, because people have told me, is that they've become better leaders. They've become better people. In some ways, they've found ways to get unstuck from things that they felt like they were carrying for a long time. They feel more confident about themselves as professionals or as individuals, and that is like all of these things, right, are incredibly important, because the ripple effect, I hope, and the reason I focus on leadership is because if you have, and we will all have experienced this, right? If you work for a good leader, it changes everything.
100%.
And if you work for a bad one, it changes
Yeah,
everything.
everything else can be constant. Yeah,
Everything, right?
yeah.
Yep.
And so for me, it's like that is a really important node of impact. And so hopefully my intent is like by getting to enough leaders in enough different ways through different touch points, different levels of working together, it will have that ripple effect that will compound over time. And that is my goal, right? Is to have the butterfly effect happen around the world in whatever way can through leaders and leadership. It is also about, for me, is like helping people through my words, through my work, like to help people lead themselves better. And for me, self-leadership is a huge, and it's something like I refer to it as a practice, because it is, right? Like yoga or like many things that that we do. Like it's not like you just nail it one day and you wake up and you're like the best of the best and you're the expert at it all. Like it is a constant practice. The things that I teach, the things that I share, the things that I talk about, I'm still working on, right? Some things are easier now than they were before. Some things are not, but it is a practice. And I think for so many individuals, we go through our lives guided and shaped and buffeted by lots of things that are not us. And
in some ways we're taught to do that.
Correct.
Yeah.
Exactly, right? It's like,
Yeah.
listen to me, and like, you know, all of these things, right? And I know better than you. Sometimes that's true. Oftentimes it's not. But for me, it's about like, how are you going to literally lead your own life? Right. And you be the driver, and you be the decider, and be the one who decides that these are my values, as opposed to just absorbing, you know, sort of whole cloth something that someone else has given you or that you've inherited or that you're around. Like, these are my values. This is what I care about. This is the legacy I want to have. This is the things that are important to me. A good friend of mine often talks about how like too many people should all over themselves. And I love that because it's so true, right? Like we have this constant tape of like, oh, I should be this far ahead in my career by this point, or I should have this like level of financial success, or I should have this. But it's like, where do those shoulds come from?
Right.
Sometimes it's you, right? Sometimes it's self-directed and driven and cool. That's if that's true. But like for me, anytime, even now when I find myself saying, oh, I should do this, or I should do that, or I should be here, I should, whatever, it's like, But where did that come from? Is that my should, or is that like an expectation that someone else has given me, or is an expectation
Like a
based
comparison.
on correct?
Or, yeah.
Exactly.
Mm-hmm.
And so for me, self-leadership is really, really like the crux of it. So it's like getting it in like a formal leadership top down, but also like bottom up. You know, how can we all be better self-leaders and leaders of others?
I love that you describe it as self-leadership. I don't think I've ever heard of it described in that way, like having your own agency and
Yeah.
and
Yes.
being able to think for yourself, right?
Yeah.
And to determine, what you want your life to be, what you want your values to be. I've never thought of it as leadership,
Yeah.
and I love that concept.
Yeah.
Also, I'm glad you said that, because I think we also need to like shake up what we think of as leadership.
Yeah.
And that for me is also some of what like the undercurrent of my work is just like reimagining what we talk about when we talk about leadership. Because for so long, it has been a very specific paradigm of like who we look up to as leaders and what we think of like what is required when you are a leader. And so much of it is just totally flies in the face of reality, right? Like we have these crazy notions that leaders are these like all knowing, all seeing beings who like have all the answers, or we expect them to be. And you're like, in what universe
Right.
is that actually the reality, right? Or even in like, organizational context, this expectation of leaders are like, they're the deciders, and they're the ones who like, sort of it's my way or the highway, and this very like command and control. And like that has a place, but there are other ways to lead, and there are ways to be effective and to motivate and inspire human beings to achieve a common goal that doesn't require just like brute force and fear and intimidation.
Oh.
And so all of this to say, for me, leadership is really the key.
I love that. So you also mentioned that you're writing your second book,
Yes.
and you have your first book with you.
Yes.
So let's do a little show and tell for everyone, and tell us a little bit about this.
Yeah.
Like where did the idea come from?
Yeah.
Like when did you start it? When did you publish it? It's so exciting.
It is really exciting. So gosh, the idea, it's hard to pin it down, but for so long, I mean, I've always written. I love, like, for me, like words and language are like, they're everything. And I have written since a child. Like I remember submitting an episode idea for the Jetsons when I was like 6 or 7, and I had scripted out this whole thing, right? I've always written like fiction, nonfiction, all the things. And it was always a life goal or ambition, whatever, to be a published author. And so when I wrote my novel during business school, I thought that was gonna be it, right? This is like how I get into that like rarefied world of published authordom. Anyway, long story short, I like was submitting it to agents and had some interest, and I was like, there was all this momentum building. And then to the creatives in your audience, this might speak to you. Like literally one day the muse was just gone. And I had nothing left in me to like take that project any further. And I don't know if it was like I had felt I had done my catharsis and my paying tribute to my people and all the things I mentioned earlier. But at some point I was just like, actually, I can't. I got nothing left in me with this, right? But I didn't stop writing. I kept writing. It was partly what kept me sane through like the most tedious, boring stretches of growing a business. And then a friend of mine was like, well, why don't you write a blog? And so I started writing a blog that I didn't publish, didn't tell anyone about. And he's like, well, why don't you tell people? I was like, fine.
These are the good friends.
Good advice,
These are
right?
the friends you need
Good
in your
advice.
5. Yes.
Yes. And so I did. And then it grew, and it was like just honest conversations about all of the things that we've been talking about self-leadership, about obstacles, about deciding like how you're going to overcome a certain challenge, the things that I was learning, the things that I was like finding funny or interesting. It was just for me, it was like reflection pieces on things that I was like, that's interesting. Or, oh, that was like, I want to capture this in written form. And then I realized that like the blog didn't turn into this book, but what it was like, I see the themes that people really resonate with. And I see the types of topics that I'm getting asked to talk about or help large organizations with. And it really comes down to like the subtitle of my book, which is Unconventional Life Lessons for Thinking Bigger, Leading Better, and Being Bolder, right? Thinking bigger, leading better, and being bolder in many different ways was showing up everywhere. And I was like, well, I have some ideas about this, right? I've got some stories and some insights and some tools, right? Like what I loved about writing this book was like, I wrote it for me. It was very self-indulgent in that way because everything in here is like so the things that I needed to hear at different stages in my life. But it's also, it's like, but this is what I did to get through it. And I know I'm not alone because I've had all of these people, right? Like tell me that they're going through similar and need help. And so it's sort of like, it's like a toolkit. It's like a Swiss Army knife.
Oh, I love that.
It's like a Swiss Army knife for life. It's, yeah, if you've got work stuff going on that you want some advice or like ideas for, it's in here. If it's life stuff, it's in here. It genuinely is really versatile because like we are all whole people, and things that have impact on us in one part of our life will often be having an impact on us in different parts of our lives, right? Like finding your voice, right? The agency's motto, speaking truth to power. Like, what does that look like at work? What does that look like at home? What does that look like, I don't know, with your kids or whatever, right? Like there's all of this stuff is transferable in any context. And that's what I love about it is like, you don't have to be a leader. You don't have to be a CEO. That's the title just because that's like my journey, right? But you don't have to be a formal leader about it to get anything from it. And the other thing I love about this, the way that I wrote this book was it's all me. And I don't mean that like this is like me bearing my soul, but it's like this is all of the things, all of the hats that I wear, right? I talk about experiences from becoming a first-time parent. I talk about experiences from being an immigrant, about being a woman, about being an intelligence officer, about being a leader, about just being a human being. And we are all like layers of human, right?
Yeah.
And this is like the most complete sharing of the different parts of me and that again that we all share in common, right? Like the struggles to be heard, the struggles to be seen, the struggles to like manage relationships, to command respect and whatever it is, right? Like all of the things. So anyway, that's this book.
That's amazing.
Yeah.
That was really beautiful the way that you described that.
Thank
And I
you.
do think there's so much power in like in creating in that way.
Yeah.
Because when you're creating, you're basically leaving a piece of yourself in the world, right?
100%.
And that's what you've done with this book. I think that's amazing.
And the coolest thing about this, like the work that I do thanks to this book, but also other things, is the impact it's had on my kids. They're young, right? Like one is 4, one is 8 right now, and they're both girls, and they are so proud of me. And it's crazy because like, you know, my 7, or at the time she was 5, I think, when the book came out, and she was like, Mommy, do you think my school will, if you give some copies, we can put in my school library? It's like, maybe a little bit advanced. But it's so cool to like,
sweet.
and even so, like I wrote this when I was postpartum with my second, and even her, I have never talked to her about my work because she's been so young up until just now, right? And even she has somehow found like the resonance because one day I remember coming home and she was sat on our sofa, no, sorry, on the carpet, and the book was like this, so it was upside down. She wasn't reading it, but she was like skimming through it, and she's like, Mommy, it's your book. And I was like, how the hell did you know that?
Oh
It's crazy, right?
my gosh.
So
I also just like have this image of your daughter like reading your book upside down. It's like cracking me up.
they're so amazing. And so it's like just no. So the other thing, again, speaking of life lessons, is like I've made them a part of my life, not just a part of my home life. And that's a really hard thing to figure out how to do. And I'm not pretending like I have it all figured out, but I talk to them a lot. And I remember when I was writing this, oh my God, it was still COVID. I was postpartum. My older one was like 3 or 4, and there were so many things going on in the world and so many just like upheavals to manage. And it was hard the times when I was writing to take like my kids are so active, and the older one at the time would be like, Mommy, can you just come dance? I want you to play with me, or I want you to like dance to this song with me. She loves Selena. And so there were so many times it would like wrench my heart to be like, I can't right now. And finally I was like, but you know what? I'm going to tell you why. This is what I'm doing. This is what I'm working on. This is why it's important to me. You are, of course, important to me, but this is also important to me. And I think it really helped. It sure as hell helped me. But I think it also helped her And actually, I know it did because at one point, my husband told me, like, she went to him and she's like, Daddy, mommy can't come play right now because she's writing her book down.
Oh.
And I thought, thank goodness I had that conversation, right? Instead of constantly like pushing her away and being like, no, just like get out of my way, let me do this thing. I was like, I'm going to tell you why I'm pushing you away. And I think sometimes we can have those conversations with the people who are affected by our work, by our passions, by our ambitions, by our everything. So it doesn't feel so lonely for them and for us. So anyway, but that's this.
Absolutely. Amazing. I love it. Well, thank you so much for bringing it and for sharing it with us.
You got
I
it.
can't wait to read it.
I know, me too. Me too.
Immediately.
Do the homework.
So many things. Help me.
Do the homework.
Amazing.
Told you I have a teacher's soul, right? So there are genuinely, they're like worksheets and homework and exercises.
I mean, you can't be a self-leadership coach if there's not exercises.
Right.
So I'm fully prepared for that.
Yeah.
Amazing.
Yeah.
Do you want to ask our final question?
Yeah. So I can't believe we're at the end.
I know.
That went by
this
so
has been
fast.
so fun. So fun.
So in keeping with the name Iron Butterfly,
Yeah.
if you could give yourself a code name, what would it be and why?
Oh my God. So this was such a hard question, right? And I was like, man, you already took a good one. I didn't even know about Iron Butterfly until you ladies. But I'm going to stick with something boring, but it feels honest. And it's Arsenal. And there are two reasons why. And then I have a story about it, which is really funny. It's in the book. So Arsenal was my call sign when I served overseas. So it has like special significance just because of that. But also the reason I chose it at the time was because I'm a huge soccer fan and Arsenal is my team. And that was it. Like I was scrambling. I had nothing. I was like, what is this? What significant thing that is not going to be very specific to me, right? That's like not a close identifier can I choose? And Arsenal was the only thing I could think of. And then when I was overseas, I remember one of the security guys being like, so your name's Arsenal. Is that because you're the full Arsenal? And I was like, oh. And I was like, no, it's because of the soccer team, right? Like, what do you even say to that, right?
What?
That's crazy.
Oh, I can tell you some crazy stories.
But
whatever, right? Like, I didn't care. I was like, no, dude, it's the soccer team. But what I think, to his point, he was kind of not alluding to the full Arsenal in that sense. But for me, or maybe he is. I will leave others to decide. But for me, the reason I like that, the idea of the full Arsenal is because for me, like, I draw inspiration from everywhere. And I think having lots of tools in your arsenal is such, again, like going back to what we talked about earlier about like being resourceful and having lots of, again, to put it in IC terms, like having lots of streams of intel, right? It's so important. And even now, like I learn so much from art, from science, from, from the intelligence world, like all of these things inform the way I lead and inform the way I do the work that I do now, that I think it's a really important reminder that the world is so much bigger than the worlds we sometimes inhabit. So
I love that.
Yeah,
I love that. Amazing. Well, thank you so much for saying yes to this. Thank you for joining, for sharing just so many all those different parts of yourself with us and with our listeners. So we know people will love this episode and we're just so glad that you're able to join us.
It was my pleasure. And I hope you don't have too much trouble editing out my noisy pants.
They're the best part.
We can put some details about it in the show notes. It was such a delight, ladies. Thank you for having me.
Thank you.
Of course. This has been an episode of Iron Butterfly Podcast. To learn more about Iron Butterfly Media, visit our website at www.ironbutterflymedia.com. If you like the show, please be sure to rate, review, and subscribe, and follow Iron Butterfly on social media for bonus content. You can also support us on Patreon. Lastly, we want to thank our producer, Amanda Young, and the entire Iron Butterfly team. Stay fierce, and we'll talk next time.